Jimmy, here I am! Jimmy heard his mother's voice calling. Leader stiffened and growled a warning. He didn't know the strange woman who was rushing at him. He wasn't sure that it was all right. Mom, Jimmy called, where are you? Then Leader relaxed at the cheerful tone in Jimmy's voice. Jimmy was gathered into his mother's arms. Why, Jimmy, you've grown in the last month. You look fine. The hostess stepped back as she smiled at Mrs. Carter. Well, goodbye, Jimmy. It was nice having you with me. Thanks, Jimmy said to her. And then to his mother, Mom, this was the hostess. This was the hostess on the airplane. Thank you for taking care of Jimmy, Mrs. Carter said. I hope he was no trouble. Not a bit, the hostess assured her. He was a perfect passenger, and so was the dog. Then she turned and left them. Mrs. Carter looked down. Oh, is this the dog? Yes, Mom, isn't he great? Jimmy dropped to one knee with his arm around the dog's neck. His name is Leader, Mom, and he's just wonderful. Yes, he's beautiful. Mrs. Carter reached toward the dog slowly. He was still a strange dog and very large. She wasn't quite sure. He'll shake hands, Mom, if you say howdy. How do you do? Like this. How do you do, Leader? See, Mom, see? Oh, I guess I can take the muzzle off now, too. Mrs. Carter thought she would be just as pleased if he left it on for a while, but she didn't say anything. Jimmy unbuckled the muzzle, and Leader shook his head, flapping his ears and rattling his chain collar. Now, Mom, shake hands with him. You'll have to stoop down. When we get home, we can get to know each other, Jimmy. Where's your baggage? Where's your baggage check? I've got it inside my pocket with my ticket stub. He felt very important, like a world traveler returning home. After the baggage was unloaded from the plane, he claimed the suitcase. Mrs. Carter called the taxi. What do we do with the dog? Where do we put him? He goes right along with us, Mom, just like in the station wagon. And Mrs. Carter led Jimmy to the taxi. He tried to remember what Mr. Weeks had taught him about entering a bus. Leader hung back until Jimmy got into the cab, then piled in after him. Mrs. Carter squeezed over the corner of the seat. Mom, Jimmy said when they got started, that Braille slate that you sent me was great. Could Carolyn read the letters I wrote? Yes, Jimmy, she did very well. Of course, she had a lot of time to study them out. What do you mean, Mom, a lot of time? Well, you didn't write to us as often, and she had time to puzzle out what you said in one letter before she got the next one. I did so. I wrote lots of times. Only you answered so quick, I couldn't keep up with them. I was only teasing, Jimmy. Mrs. Carter gave him a quick hug. I think you did very well. Who read my letters to you? Miss Young, the social worker. She taught me how to eat by myself, and you've got to mark my clothes. Ellen, oh, such a lot of things to do. As they were driving home, Jimmy tried to tell his mother everything that had happened during the past month, and she interrupted with many questions. When they arrived home, Jimmy took off Leader's harness and let him run and sniff around the house. The dog ran into every room, sniffing every corner. What's the matter with him, Jimmy? Is he all right? Why is he doing that? Oh, he's just getting acquainted, Mom. He's got to get used to where he's going to live. Leader ran into Jimmy's room and stood at the head with his head cocked to one side. He seemed to recognize that this was Jimmy's room. It was much like the room at school. He appeared to be satisfied and came back with his tail wagging, and to lie at Jimmy's feet. Mrs. Carter looked down at the dog and said, as if to herself, he can sleep on the porch until we get a doghouse built for him. House for him? On the porch? You mean Leader, Mom? Why, yes, Jimmy. He'll have to sleep somewhere. But he stays with me, Mom. He wouldn't be happy if we were separated. Jimmy was getting worried. You won't be separated. He's such a large dog. We wouldn't have any furniture left. Don't you understand, Mom? He sleeps under my bed. But Jimmy, a dog could never get under your bed. You know it's not high enough. Gee, I never thought of that. He paused and grinned. I guess they should have given me a Dachshund instead. I guess they could have given you a pony stable, his mother corrected. He'll be all right in my room, Mom, you'll see, just like at school. Leader looked from one face to the other as if were waiting for Mrs. Carter's decision. Well, we'll try it out, Mom decided. I'll fold an old blanket on the floor. Perhaps he can sleep on that. Thanks, Mom, that'll be great. Jimmy laid his hand on his dog to tell him everything was all right. What about food and water, Jimmy? Oh, I forgot. I guess we'll have to go get to the market to buy some. Can't you use a box of the food that Chuck and Art gave you? Sure, I guess so. I can keep a pan of water in the kitchen. He won't mess up the floor. Mrs. Carter may have had her doubts about that, but she gave permission just the same. Let's see how thirsty he is now. What pan can I have? The three of them went into the kitchen where Mrs. Carter selected a pan and filled it with water. Wait, Mom, I've got to take care of him. No one else can feed him? That's the rule. Then you give him water. Mrs. Carter watched as he carried the pan of water over to the corner and set it down without even spilling. Here, Leader, want some water? The dog looked at his dish, then looked up at Jimmy. That was not his water dish, and he hesitated. Okay, Leader. Jimmy knelt beside the dish and pointed to it. Come, Leader, have some water. The dog went over to it, lapped up a couple of times to see if it was all right, looked at Jimmy, then drank thirstily. I'll have to have another dish for food. Will it be all right, Mom? Why, certainly, Jimmy. Get the box off the table in your room while I get the dish. Jimmy started out immediately. Leader was at his heels. They returned with Leader scampering about, very much interested in the box of food. As soon as he's fed, Mom, I want to show you how he works. Jimmy measured out the food, and they both stood over and watched as Leader ate. Then they went to the living room, where Jimmy put the harness and leash on the dog. If you stand on the front porch, Mom, I've got to teach Leader that this is his home. Mrs. Carter was not quite sure she understood, but Jimmy seemed to know so well what he was doing. Tell me what you want me to do, she said. She followed as Jimmy and Leader went out to the front door and crossed the porch. Leader led Jimmy to the edge of the steps. His mother was about to call him, but checked herself just in time as she saw Leader stop and Jimmy reach out with his foot to find the steps. Now, Mom, you stay here and call me when I'm right in front of the gate on my way back, Jimmy said. Where are you going? She asked, a little troubled. You see, just call when I'm in front of the gate. She watched in amazement as Leader led Jimmy down the steps, along the path of the sidewalk, halfway up the block, walking quickly. Then she saw them turn around and come back. Here, Jimmy, she called as they got to the front gate. Left, inside, Leader. Home, Leader, home. She heard Jimmy command, and the dog turned left, came inside, and stopped at the foot of the stairs. Jimmy, that's wonderful. Now I must do it again, Mom said, going in the opposite direction. They repeated the performance, going half a block to the left. Again his mother called to them as they returned to the front gate. She watched the dog bring Jimmy up the steps and into the house as carefully as she could have led him herself. Now Leader knows his home, Mom, and he'll turn in his own accord, Jimmy said proudly. Impulsively, Mrs. Carter stretched out her hand to the dog. You wonderful dog. Leader looked up at Jimmy and then went straight into Mrs. Carter's arms. She hugged him. He licked her face as much to say, I understand. We both love him and will take care of him. She looked at the dog as if in agreement and said softly under her breath, You're such a wonderful dog. But will you be able to help Jimmy achieve a normal life?